הקהל מתבקש להמשיך לעמוד עד לירידת משמר הכבוד מן הבמה.
Please remain standing.
לפתוח את טקס יום השואה והגבורה, תשפ"א.
I'm honored to open the ceremony indicating the heroism of Jewish rescuers during the Holocaust. This is a joint ceremony organized by JNF Bnei Brit, and it takes place at this plaza at the Martyrs Forest, and it has been taking place for the past 20 years. This year, because of COVID restrictions, the ceremony, we only have limited presence at the forest, but there is broadcast on Facebook, on YouTube. And before the ceremony starts, we will start with a testimony by Mrs. Hannah Arnon, who fled with her family to Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony, and survived the cruel Japanese occupation. Hannah, one of the founders of the Committee of Cherishing the Heroism of Jewish Rescuers during the Holocaust. Go ahead. Hello. My name is Hannah Arnon Beninga. I was born in 1939 in the Netherlands. And our story of my family's story, we escaped. We escaped from the Netherlands, and I say I was a baby when my parents fled, and what I'm about to tell you is mostly the story of my whole family, because I have very few memories. I have a picture here of a birthday party in 1935. This is the Frank Hoslinsky family. That was my grandparents' family. They were born in the northern part of the Netherlands, and in this party there were about 45 people. and only less than 10 of them survived the war. It shows this tragedy experienced by the Jews in the Netherlands, and we were saved, but we paid a very high price. My parents got married in 1937, and they knew very well. In fact, my father, who was reading German papers, and the Dutch actually welcomed the Jews who fled from Germany. So they knew what was going on, and they knew that there would be a disaster in the Netherlands. My father truly believed that the Jews in the Netherlands will not be able to escape, and they planned to escape. My grandparents planned to escape, my mother's parents. They planned to escape, and the first step they took was in 1940. They moved from northern Netherlands, where they lived, where I was born, and they fled to Haarlem, which is in the west coast of the Netherlands, and it was closer to England. So they moved in May or March 1940, and a few months later, the war started, and then my father came from the north where he used to work. So he came on that day, that was the 10th of May. He arrived by bicycle to the house where my mom and myself were staying, and my grandmother arrived the following day. The grandfather, her husband, my mother's father, did not arrive because there was no public transportation on that week after the invasion and during the war. And my grandfather did not arrive. We fled without him, and he was murdered in Auschwitz. My father arrived, he had some money in his pocket, and he bought the bicycle, and he bought cyanide, poison. And he knew that he will be able to decide what to do with it later. But he managed to meet us, and there was great, we were all very stressed. And 2 days later, on May 13, they had this possibility. That was a Sunday, and they managed to escape. They had relatives and friends that were experiencing the same situation, and in fact, there was great escape from the Netherlands on that day, and an attempt to escape from the Netherlands, from this city, specific city, which has a seaport. And there were very long lines on that day, mostly of Jews and other people who attempted to escape to England, but they didn't manage to do that. We managed, we were lucky enough, and with some friends of us, there were 2 taxis that we managed to escape, but others were arrested by the Dutch military forces. But we managed to actually board a fishing ship, and we reached England. And it was quite an adventure in itself, because there were submarines but we managed to arrive safely, all 4 of us. And there, we couldn't stay there. We were considered enemy aliens, citizens of an enemy country, because the Netherlands was already occupied, so we couldn't stay in England, and we needed to report to the police daily. And a few weeks later, they found a ship, a Canadian ship called Orcadet, and the ship sailed from England to Australia. And during we sailed alongside the shores of Africa. There were battles taking place in the Mediterranean. We couldn't reach the Suez Canal, so it was a very long trip. It took us more than a month, and there were storms, and there were all sorts of other hardships during this trip. And on this ship, there were about 40 Dutch Jews who eventually reached Indonesia. We reached Western Australia. We couldn't stay there. We didn't have visas. And we boarded a ship, an English ship, which carried 2,000 sheep from Australia to Singapore for the English military force. And on the way to Singapore, the ship anchored in Batavia. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Batavia, it was Surabaya in an island, the most populated island of Indonesia. And there we disembarked. And of course, as Dutch citizens, we didn't have a problem because it was a Dutch colony. And then the story, we started living in Indonesia, and eventually we were arrested in camps from April 43 to August 45. We were detained until the 15th of August when the Japanese surrendered, and then we were released, but we had nowhere to go. And during this time we spent in this camp for 2 years, I have a picture. You can also see it in Yad Vashem Museum. That was my bag with the number, with the inmate number. I have an inmate number. I had a doll, and I took it with me from the first transport to the next transport, and I carried it with me. And what the story behind this bag is that when we arrived by a certain transport and they counted the doll as an inmate, and we were standing for hours in the sun till they realized that the mistake was actually counting the doll as a kid. That was a funny anecdote. And at the end of the war, we reached this house, a house of my father's friend, who spent some time with my father, and his wife was French and she wasn't arrested. He gathered all his friends in this big house, colonial house, and there were, it was a very big house, and all his friends stayed there. There were about 30 of us staying at this house, and we were waiting for our transport back, not transport, but the Netherlands sent ships actually to bring back its civilians home to the Netherlands. And we embarked the ship in January 46, and we reached a month later. We reached the Netherlands a month later. In February, we arrived back in the Netherlands. So this is my story in a nutshell, but what happened to me personally is that in ceremonies, our ceremonies of Jews who rescued other Jews, I always found it difficult to tell this story because the children, when I used to tell this story to children, the children did not understand the story, this whole complex geography. And then they used to ask me, well, so you didn't stay in a ghetto, you didn't stay in a concentration camp. And I didn't want to tell the story, my story again. But still, they convinced me. And then I was telling the story, and the audience was 7th graders, and there were 5 Ethiopian kids. And when I started telling my story, I realized that the Ethiopian kids exactly understood what I've been through because they've been through the same thing. And I understood them and they understood me. And for me, it was a real change. And then I realized so many things about the way my parents behaved, especially how my father behaved. So now I'm going back to the war. First of all, the decision to escape was a very difficult decision to make. And very few people actually took this decision. And I remember when we were liberated and moved into this big house where we stayed before we came back to Holland, to the Netherlands, one day there was a radio broadcasting by BBC. BBC had radio broadcasts in Dutch. And then for the first time, it was in the month of October 45, for the first time, this whole group of Dutch Jews who stayed there realized the magnitude of the tragedy. We didn't know exactly how many, but they realized that they wouldn't find their relatives, any relatives. And I was in bed, I was 6 years old, I was already sleeping, and all of a sudden I woke up and I started screaming and crying. And then my mom told me that they approached my bed and my father cried. And I heard this story several times. So I thought, okay, he was crying because he was happy that he managed to rescue us. But later I understood that the story which was much more complicated than that, that in fact, throughout these years, when they didn't know what was going on there in Europe, they had, they felt that they made a mistake, that the escape was actually a mistake because they didn't know what was going on. And they thought perhaps our destiny would be worse than the destiny of those who stayed behind in the Netherlands. And I think that this is what actually bothered my father. And it's a story of an escape. And even when you speak to Ethiopian immigrants, this is exactly what happened to them. They fled. Their escape was horrible, and they arrived in Israel, and it wasn't exactly as they expected it to be. It's not, an identical story, but this is the sense of decisions that you take in life, and eventually these decisions concern life and death. And these were the things that my family had to live with. It's not only that they managed to survive, but they also suffered some guilt because of those who were left behind and those who didn't survive. And especially, I'm speaking about my grandfather, who actually managed to arrive to our home a few hours too late, and he didn't join us. And those who survived, My father's father was managed to survive. He lived in a small village in the north of the Netherlands. They lived there before the war. 10 Jews lived in this village from Beninga family. They lived there, 10 Jews or 11 people, 11 Jews lived in this village before the war, and only one of them survived. That was my grandfather, my father's father. And that was the destiny of the Jews in the Netherlands. They were murdered. So many Dutch were murdered. 77% of the Jews were murdered and never managed to survive the war. And up until today, it's something which is considered a tragedy. And even the Queen talked about it at the Knesset, and she said that the Dutch are still ashamed today. And I think that she really believes that, but I think that it's not necessarily so, because in the Netherlands, they don't usually feel this way today. Although in the Netherlands, there were many righteous Gentiles, but some of the reason is that many Jews were told about, and they were caught, and they needed to escape from one place to another. And I have one friend who actually lived in 12 different addresses with her sister, and they actually survived. They were rescued by 10 people, and they received the righteous Gentile citation because they managed to save 2 little girls. And in the Netherlands, there were many Jews rescued other Jews. They faked certificates and they smuggled Jews from the Netherlands either to Switzerland or to the south of France through Spain. And Jews managed to reach Israel just during the war, the land of Israel. I think there were 2 ships that arrived in Israel from Spain to Haifa port in the middle of the war. And that was done thanks to a group of Jews and non-Jews. And besides, there were other actions and rescuing by some of the members of the Jewish Council who also helped smuggling kids and hide kids in Amsterdam. There is a movie about one of them, which was broadcasted on the Israeli TV recently, Zussman, that was the name. And there's also a bridge in his name in Amsterdam. And there were other actions taken by Jews who were also active. And not so many people know about it. And in our ceremony, we want to mark the heroism of these Jews who rescued other Jews. Anyway, after the war, my family rehabilitated, recovered. My parents were young, and they had sons, 3 sons who were born in 1947, 48, and 49. And for me, it was, such a joy. I suddenly realized that death is not the only thing. They always talked about so many people who died, who were murdered. And then I realized that there is that life can be created as well. That was for me a joy. And then I immigrated to Israel many years later. I was a member of the Zionist youth movement in the Netherlands. But My family then moved to the United States, and then I graduated from high school and I went to university, and I got a scholarship for the Hebrew University, and I came to Israel in 1958, and I spent 1 year here, 63 years ago. And here, my 4 children were born, 2 girls, 2 boys, and see the continuity. This picture was taken 2 years ago on my 18th birthday, 80th birthday. You can see all my kids and spouses and 4 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. Yes. So there are so many other things that I can tell you, but I think that I told you the most important points. Thank you very much. Okay. Should I go on now? I think that's it. I think I'm done. Usually there are questions, but here there is no dialogue. Can you tell us about other families you know, about their experience? But what happened to them after they arrived in Israel? Because people did not like to speak about the Holocaust. I can tell you, yes, I can tell you that one of the things in our family, that happened in our family, my mother survived, of course, as I mentioned. My grandmother survived, and my mother's sister in the Netherlands, she had only 1 sister and she survived. So these 3 women used to talk a lot about the family, and we as kids, we grew up with ghosts all around us. So because they spoke about the birthdays of the dead ones, and they talked about all sorts of things that happened to them, sad things, funny things, but they used to talk about the family on and on. And so when my mother passed away here in Israel in 2008, she left behind some memoir she wrote with my nephew Noah in English. She wrote it in English. And then at the end of the memoir, there is a list of about 120 relatives of hers that were murdered. And they came to me from Yad Vashem Museum and they asked me to explain the connections. And it turned out that I was one of, that out of these 120, I could explain the connection to 100 relatives. And my aunt was still alive and she couldn't explain the other connections to the others. She couldn't explain whether they were members of the family or friends. But since in our family, they used to talk a lot, and it's not, it was different because there were other families where the parents did not say anything. And there are certain people my age who still do not know what happened to their parents. And this is the advantage that, and actually, these stories should be told. There are scars, there will be scars, but the stories should be told, must be told. I can keep seeing the red light. It was great. Thank you. It was great. You did it very, very nicely. Dear guests, please Take your seats. Just another reminder, please turn off your cell phones. If some of you do not wear masks, if you didn't bring your mask, you can get one from the stand. Please take your seat. Dear friends, I'd like to remind you we still need to follow the COVID restrictions, so we still need to wear masks. Please be seated. The honor guard we'll see the formation. Left, right, left. Present your rifles. We'll now see the national flag lowered to half-mast. Please stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, we will wait for the siren.
נמתין לצפירה.
We're still waiting for the siren.
Schmarri, da geht nicht gut. Da geht, schick. Schmarri, יחתיק תשקו. טיף, שק. שמרי יציג תשקו. ציג, שק. שמרי יעבור לנוח. מוד נוח. אנא יישארו לעמוד.
Please remain standing. We are gathering here today to follow the order of remember what Amalek did unto thee and to cherish the memory of the 6 million Holocaust victims. The ceremony is dedicated this year to the marking of the heroism of Yitzhak Arzi and Wilhelm Filderman from Romania and Jose Abu Kuper from Algeria. They all rescued their brothers during the Holocaust. And in addition to 2 other 10 rescuers from different areas in Europe who put their lives on the line to save Jews. Amongst them, for the first time in this ceremony, 2 people from Israel, paratrooper Hannah Senish and Chaim Moshe Bezalel Shapira, the head of the immigration department at the Jewish agency. The ceremony this year is a joint ceremony with minimal physical attendance by speakers and representatives of the families here at the forest. And we also have students who and soldiers and members of the Bnei Brit and other who join us from afar. We are welcoming all the attendants and viewers from Israel and from the diaspora. And I'm honored to invite Dr. Hadass Malka Cohen, representative of Bnei Brit Israel, to light the torch on behalf of the next generation in memory of the Holocaust victims. Attention.
שמרי, דגל תשקו. דגל, שק. שמרי יחטיף תשקו. טיף, שק. שמרי יציג תשקו. ציג, שק. שמרי יבוא לנוח. מוד נוח. שמרי יבוא לדום. שמר דום. שמרי יחטיף תשקו. tief, schick. משמר יפנה, חוצה, פנה. לפי השמאל, קדימה, צעד. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. הקהל מוזמן לשבת.
Please take your seats.
אני מתכבד
I'm honored to welcome all the attendants of this ceremony, a very unique ceremony that marks that annually what the Jewish rescuers have done during the Holocaust. So today we have with us the Romanian ambassador, Mr. Radu Yahonid, Mr. Avram Duvdevani, world chairman of JNF, Dr. Chaim Katz, chairman of Bnei Bnit World Center and member of board of directors of JNF, Mr. Shar Shalom Jerby, the director, education and community division in JNF, Mr. Nissan Chalik, the chair of the board of director committee for Holocaust survivors and social projects at the JNF, and the chief superintendent Erez Kalimi and Mr. Noam Semel, the director general of Abima National Theater and the son-in-law of Yitzhak Arzi and his son Nimrod, the grandchild of Yitzhak Arzi, and Mr. Eli Shachar and Mrs. Chana Arnon. Please, I'd like to thank all the survivors, Mrs. Chana Arnon, Mr. Eliezer Lev Zion, and Chaim Roth, who actually told us their personal stories from the Holocaust before the ceremony and afterwards. And now I'm honored to invite Mr. Avraham Duvdevani, World Chairman, JNF, to address the audience. Distinguished guests, those who are here with us, and those who see us, who view us through the different media. For more than 80 years, the enemy actually murdered a third of the Jewish population, and still those who were exposed to the atrocities of the Holocaust, we are all agonizing and ask ourselves, could it be that human beings could be so cruel to women, to children? Could it be possible that men could plan and implement the final solution of a destruction of a whole nation? And perhaps we want to avoid such horrors and we want to feel relieved, but we have this duty and obligation to remember and never forget, to remind others, to remember for us and to remind others, and especially the younger generation who did not experience it, the hardships of the Holocaust in first person. 6 million Jews. It's a number. And we always talk about numbers. So many were murdered, so many were killed in wars, and so many passed away from COVID. Numbers, figures. But this number cannot reflect, cannot change our way of thinking. And that's why today people are even more shocked when they see a cat that was ran over. it's more shocking for us than to think about the 6 million. This is human nature. And that's why our obligation is not only to talk about the numbers, but to tell the stories to the younger generations, how heroic they were. They were on the verge of death and they were facing all those threats. But who were they? And what did they do? And each of them is a whole world. How did it seem? How would our own world seem, the Jewish world seem like, if it weren't for this horrible tragedy, if life had gone on? The Jewish world would have been so much different, not only in terms of the number, but also in terms of the huge contribution of all those generations to culture, to science, to national security, to anything. We would have been in such a different place today. Those who were murdered, not only the 6 million people, but the whole huge potential of them that could have developed if they remained alive. And this is something that we must emphasize and remember. And this is what actually binds us to fulfill this void, to fill this void of the missing potential in the Jewish world, the missing potential of those 6 million. Perhaps we cannot really do that, but in terms of contribution to humanity, to Jewish nation, Jewish spirit, this is our obligation to fill the void. This is our obligation, and we should do that in order to fulfill the place of those who were murdered in the gas chambers. In this place, next to the monument, this huge monument that tells the story of the entire Jewish nation, including the Holocaust. Here, in this place, in the Martyrs forest, thousands of trees were planted to commemorate those millions who were murdered. It's called the Martyrs forest, and this is one of the great things that were done by Bnei Brit and JNF. And that's why we hold this ceremony here. And that's why we chose this place. This is where we planted thousands of trees, because men are like trees. This is what we always say. The trees remind us the similarity between the trees and the people, and it reminds us of the millions who are no longer with us, because the trees have roots and they aspire to grow like men and the spirit of men. And that's why we are standing here today, because we are exactly like the trees. And here we are commemorating the memory of those victims. And we promise ourselves to remember and never forget, and to tell the younger generations the whole story, and to do something to mark the memories and to fill the void because of the fact that they were murdered and all of this missing potential. May they be of blessed memory. Thank you, Avraham Duvdevani. And I'm now honored to invite Dr. Chaim Katz, the Chairman, Bnei Brit World Center.
Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Romania in Israel,
Your Excellency, Romanian Ambassador Radu Onid, thank you for coming. Chairman of JNF, our partners for this important enterprise. Very talented men, Avraham Duvdevani, superintendent from Border Police who has accompanied this ceremony for many years, Noam Semmel, the Director General of Abima National Theater. I'd like to remind someone else who has been with us for many years, our friend Eliezer Lev Zion, a rescuer. And I'd like to mark his being such a hero, and he described what he did in the French underground. And we all know that they were all afraid. Being a hero doesn't mean that you're not scared. We are all scared. But if you are a hero, you find it within yourself to do things despite this fear. And I'd like to congratulate Eliezer, who is with us today, and the families of the rescuers, dear guests. I'm so excited to stand here before you after this difficult year we've been through and the whole world has been through. And actually, there were many victims of the pandemic, and amongst the Jews in the diaspora, in the States and in England. A year passed by since the last Holocaust Remembrance Day. A year ago, we had this ceremony despite COVID restrictions that were almost at their peak. And then on the stage, a year ago, there was one person standing on this stage, one person, and two other people who handled the technicality. So on the whole, we were three. There were three of us, and today there are more. There are 100 people here, and we are still waiting for the day on which we will be able to gather 1,000 or 2,000 people, amongst them high school students. And I'm glad to hear that they're watching us on YouTube, and border police soldiers who always join the ceremony. I don't want to talk about Passover and Holocaust Remembrance Day, but every year we say that the Jews have been threatened so much, and I'm already 70 years old. But the Holocaust for me is history. It's part of history. I was not there, and for my children, it's history, of course, and for my grandchildren, they study about the Holocaust. And that's why we, Bnei Brit organization, and Avraham Duvdevani, who is the chair of JNF, we try to think about how to commemorate the concept of Jews rescuing Jews. We talk about it, and we want to establish a certain site that will commemorate these Jews, so that their children and their grandchildren will know this history. It's a glorious history, and that's what we've been discussing lately. And now I'd like to say a few other words. We, the Jews, we actually joined the Allies. Many of us joined the Allies forces because we knew that we were needed, and we also joined the Red Army and the English Army and the US Army. But I think that what we are interested in today is this the fact that the Jews in the ghettos, in the camps, actually worked very hard, and there were many who rescued other Jews, and they did that while endangering themselves in order to help others to survive. It happened in Europe, and they wanted to actually help them find shelter. And when we talk about the heroes of Israel, and I'm not saying that lightly, but they were real heroes, we want to commemorate, and we want to learn a lesson from their dedication. They fought for the Jewish nation, the rescuers, and they're not with us today. We started this annual ceremony too late. We should have started it 20 years before that. There were a few survivors who received the citation, but we don't have so many of them now. So we actually commemorated more than 300 survivors, but today we are granting the citations to their children and their grandchildren, and I'm glad to see the grandchildren and the great-great-children. And I mentioned Yitzhak Artzi's grandchild. So they told me to be brief, so it's very hard to do, but I'll try to do it. So the idea is we, the whole nation of Israel, should actually work in solidarity. And it's true, especially in our context here today. Today we are commemorating, we are celebrating the heroism of those rescuers who rescued Jews. And for the first time, we actually marking those from Algeria and the land of Israel. I just want to tell you in short that there is this huge project of ours. We conduct studies and we find out about new rescuers we hadn't known about before. So I hope we will be able to do it with JNF to build a monument, and it will be an interactive kind of monument. There will be barcodes and films so that the children will be able to study all about it. And this is our plan. I'd like again to thank from the bottom of my heart, Alan Schneider, the CEO of the Bnei Brut Global institution, and he has such original ideas, and usually we manage to implement it. He has a vision, but we are the contractor. We need to implement his vision, the vision of Alan, but we've done it and we succeeded to do that, and we will continue to study and mark the Jewish rescuers. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Chaim Katz. Now I'd like to invite the head of the Commander's Department of the Border Police Academy, Chief Superintendent Erez Kalimi. Dear Holocaust survivors, families, distinguished guests, today we bow our head as a nation in memory of those 6 million Jews who were murdered in one of the greatest tragedies of human race. Year after year, the memory of the Holocaust is still with us, and it's still painful and still very clear. Generation actually tells about the atrocities, the memory of the ruined community, the heroism of the prisoners, and the lessons of the Holocaust. So the next generation will know all about it. At the beginning, I want to apologize on behalf of the commander of the Border Police Academy, and I am replacing him today together with the members of the course. On behalf of Border Police, I'd like to say that we are proud and thrilled to represent Border Police and the Israeli police. For many years, we've been representing them in this moving ceremony. Today, we are reminded one of the darkest times in Jewish history. Cruelty, systematic cruelty, horrible cruelty displayed by the Nazis. They killed not only the victims, they killed human values we are all committed to. This Remembrance Day, today is the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Nazis' plan to destroy the entire Jewish nation, as they wanted to do, till the last Jew, but they couldn't do it. And from prosecuted nation that experienced horrible tragedies, we became a nation with a strong, prosperous state with impressive ability to defend ourselves against all those who want to harm us. We have our values, tolerance, dignity of human race. Those values prove to us that the memory of the Holocaust is part of the legacy of the Jewish history and the Israeli society. But more than that, it has proven that the establishment of the state of Israel happened despite the Holocaust and not because of the Holocaust. Dear Holocaust survivors who are here with us or watch us, the connection, the wonderful connection with you taught us at Border Police, a very important chapter about Zionism and heroism. You inspire us, like Hannah Senes said, to know that our lives are not to be taken for granted. I'm proud to stand here as a commander in Border Police, and I'm telling you that we are privileged to actually work in order to defend Israel, to defend our values, and to say again and again that we are committed to protect the state of Israel, and we know how to use our force and continue to defend the state against all of its enemies. Rabbi Lau, who survived from a death camp as a child, told us about an encounter he had a few years ago with the former American general. The American general, who was one of the soldiers liberated the camps, told Rabbi Lau while he was crying, he told him, "I'm asking your forgiveness. We arrived too late." It means that when the state of Israel was established, it was so significant because it means that we will never be in a situation when it's too late. The scroll of independence gave us our state and the ability to make decisions, necessary decisions to make sure that we will stay here. This place, on that day, we are all feel committed that a second Holocaust will never take place. May the victims be of blessed memory. Thank you, Chief Superintendent Erez Kalimi. Now we will watch a song written by Menachem Mendel, and the introduction is from the March of the Living 2018, and the song is sang by Shlomo Artzi, the singer, the son of Yitzhak Artzi. I have no words to describe my feeling here. This is my first time here at this place. I'd like to sing in memory of all the Jews who perished during the Holocaust and the survivors, and personally in memory of my mother, Margalit Mimi Artzi, who was taken by the Nazis from her home one day with no warning, having done nothing bad, nothing wrong, just because she was a Jew. And she was led to this place by train to Auschwitz. She spent a year here. She survived 3 elections by Mengele, and once she was even led to the crematorium, and she escaped. And when my mother was liberated and she came back home, she realized she lost her first husband and her child. I'm her second child from the second marriage. And despite that, she chose to leave. She married my father. She immigrated to Israel, and they had me and my sister, my late sister. She always was in mourning, and she felt as a representative, as a nation. And if there is a chance that she and my sister Nava, who passed away this year, if they hear us from above, I'm sure that they feel both sorrow and pride. And now I will sing the song of Menachem Mendel, Sheine Shendel.
זוגתי היפה בין אבים הלבנה נוגעת שיינה שיינדל שלי דרך ליל וסופה בראשי החולם את נוגעת בכפותה שלי רוח ליל ממרת ושמות כובעי עלי עורף ממצח כך הלכתי חיים כך שוכב אני מת כי דמותי כך אומרים היא בת נצח שיין שיינדל שלי יורד שלג לבן אין אדם כולם תמו אביבי, טוביה מת ומת מוטל, בן פייסי החזן, מת האיש היקר, הדוד פיני, וגם טופלה נח, טוטורי תורתם, נח פעוט ומחייב, עד מוות, נצחים הם שחוקו, ובחיו של העם, כיתות הלב ובן על מוות. והלילה היה משרפות חכלילי, ואני צוואה לך ניסחתי על איגרת קטנה שיין שיין שלי, וברור כי עיקר שכחתי. העיקר לך רציתי תודה להגיד, שהיית לי בת זוג סבלנית ומחברת, שיין שיין שיחקנו קומדיה נצחית, אך גמרנו אחרת, אחרת. שיין שיין שלי, זוגתי היפה, בין אבים הלבנה נוגעת. שיין שיין שלי, דרך ליל וסופה, בראשי ההרו את נוגעת. אני נושא עימי את צער השתיקה, את נוף האלם ששרפנו אז מפחד.
מפיו של נמדור סמל, נכדו של המציאות.
And now we hear Nimdor Semel, the grandchild of rescuer Yitzhak, the late Yitzhak Artzi. Hello, dear guests. My name is Nimdor, the grandson of Yitzhak Artzi, who is being recognized today as a Jews rescuer from Romania. I'm also the son of the late Nava Semel, who wrote so many books about the Holocaust, and she told about the second generation. And I'd like to read to you a piece of the autobiography of Yitzhak Artzi. And this story is about his perspective, how he contributed to rescuing Romanian Jews. And this is out of his book. He wrote with my mom, Nava Sevel. The beginning of December 1943, I was sitting in this synagogue in Bucharest, and we had an evening to commemorate Shalom Aleichem. And then someone approached me and told me, guess what I need to tell you? He was known as someone who really liked to play tricks, but I was amazed when he told me that I was going to go to Transnistria to rescue 5,000 Jewish orphans. In January 1944, we started our journey. The ride from Bucharest to the border of Transnistria lasted for a few hours, and then we will reach this area. We saw men with beards, with rags, dirty rags. They were staring at us, whispering to one another. Nobody dared approaching us. And within minutes, the news was spread that we actually arrived. Accompanied by the head of the committee, I went to meet with the commander and the Romanian commander, and I asked him to tour the ghetto and to find some candidates, children up to the age of 15 who were orphans. So we went from house to house, and I tried to convince I asked the parents to declare that their children were not really their children, but they were actually adopted by them or they were orphans, so that they will be able to leave. There were no official documents, and I could do whatever I wanted. And by doing that, to increase the number of orphans that were entitled to leave. So it wasn't very easy to convince, to persuade the parents, because the parents were really anxious and desperate. But I was trying to persuade them that that was the children's last chance. I told them it's very hard to separate from your children, but after the war, you will be probably will be able to meet your children. And if you do not make it, at least you'll be able to save your children. This is what I told the Reutmans. They were rabbis, and the parents actually eventually registered their child, their children as orphans. And then the enterprise continued. And just before the Red Army entered Romania, the kids were liberated from the ghettos. And I met some of them again when they embarked the ships on their way to the land of Israel. I found it hard to get to know them because they became from skeletons into lively children. And very few know the whole story of the Holocaust in Romania. And then we filmed a documentary in educational TV, and we actually accompanied writer Aaron Appelfeld to the village where he was born. And we visited a mass grave where his mother was buried. Nava, my daughter, joined us and gave testimonies from the survivors who still live there. They were like clinging to her as if she were an alien. Perhaps one day she'll write their story in one of her books. Thank you very much. And indeed, she wrote about it. And now I'm honored to invite the Romanian ambassador to Israel, Mr. Radu Ioanid, to address the audience.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to attend this event, and I thank you for inviting me, particularly my old friend from Bnei Brit, to participate in this ceremony. The memorial presence of Holocaust survivors, their physical presence, and of rescuers at today's commemoration event on Yom HaShoah, particularly in such a symbolic place, is very important. I would like to emphasize a few things about the history of the Holocaust that we must continue to preserve and teach among young generations. According to the great Holocaust historian, Raoul Hilberg, at least 5.2 million Jews were exterminated in Europe by the Nazis and their allies. But the numbers could be even higher than the symbolic number of 6 million that we use so often. We must emphasize that the Holocaust was a European project, and I say it again, a European project in which all European countries, Nazi Germany or belonging to the Allies or neutral or under Nazi occupation, all of them, I repeat, had a contribution to this mass murder without equivalent in human history. The Holocaust in Europe is known today as the tragedy where millions of Jews were killed in the great extermination camps, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec. But it is important, very important, to remember that the Holocaust also meant mass executions on the Eastern Front, in occupied Ukraine, occupied by Nazi Germany or Romania. And there, through forced labor and many ghettos that existed across the continent. The horrors committed during the Holocaust are well documented, and there is no doubt about the way in which millions of victims were killed during World War II. However, even today, 80 years since those tragic events, we can still see attempts to negate and distort the history of the Holocaust. At the same time, it is important to appreciate the efforts made to acknowledge the past. In 2003, through the International Commission for the Investigation of the Holocaust in Romania, chaired by the historian and Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel, Romania fully and officially assumed the history of the Holocaust that took place under Romanian jurisdiction during World War II. According to the final report of the Wiesel Commission, at least 280,000 Romanian and Ukrainian Jews were exterminated under the Ion Antonescu regime. A total of 135,000 Jews from northern Transylvania were deported by Horthy's Hungary and assassinated by Nazi Germany in occupied Poland. Romania's acknowledgement of these tragic events in its history was not made only through declarations, and concrete actions have been taken to recognize this dark chapter of the past. In 2009, the Holocaust Memorial was inaugurated in Bucharest, a large and dignified monument in memory of the Jews and Roma massacred during the World War II in the territories under Romanian administration. Also, the National Institute for the Study of the Holocaust in Romania, Elie Wiesel, was established under the direct coordination of the Prime Minister of Romania. Since its creation in 2005, the Wiesel Institute has had a sustained activity in preserving the memory of the Holocaust, as well as an intense educational and scientific research dimension. Today, preserving the memory of the Holocaust is all the more important, as its denial has often been combined with anti-Semitic phenomena and attempts to rehabilitate war criminals. And this phenomena has developed strongly in Europe, including Romania. The Romanian authorities, the President of Romania, Klaus Iohannis, the Prime Minister, Florin Citu, and the Romanian Parliament have recently reiterated their firm commitment to combat these dangerous tendencies. A very concrete example in this regard is the appointment in January 2021 of a special representative of the Romanian government for the promotion of memory policies combating anti-Semitism and xenophobia. Also, the President and the government of Romania are firmly committed to supporting the creation of a national museum of Jewish and Holocaust history in Bucharest, a project coordinated by the Elie Wiesel Institute that is advancing promisingly. Ladies and gentlemen, today's commemoration about honoring the memory of those murdered during the Holocaust and about paying tribute to those persons who made efforts to rescue Jews during World War II is really, really important. We bring this, we in honor of their memory. Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellence, for your important words. I'm now honored to invite Mr. Noam Semel, the head of National Theater Habima and the son-in-law of the late Yitzhak Artzi, to talk about Yitzhak Artzi and Wilhelm Filderman, the late Filderman. Thank you very much. And distinguished guests, people of Bnei Brit, and forgive me, Mr. Ellen Schneider, because I am a general director of a theater, so I'm just going to do something else. I was really moved sitting here in the past 30 minutes, ever since the ceremony started, So we are marking a Remembrance Day for the Holocaust and heroism. I was born in Israel. I was raised in Israel, sixth generation in Israel, and I wasn't exposed to the atrocities of the Holocaust. But I was raised in a neighborhood in Ness Ziona when the survivors were accused of being obedient, or they were called cowards. And because of Abba Kovner, the author, he was a hero of Vilna ghetto. They added the word heroism, but nobody tends to talk about heroism. And the B'nai Brit organization does everything it can to commemorate them. We do not know about Jewish heroes. We know about Hannah Senesh, but we must talk about Jewish heroes, those who saved Jews and those who saved others, those who saved themselves, as Shlomo Artzi, my brother-in-law, said in this video from Bergen-Belsen. He talked about his mother, Margalit Artzi, who survived and lost a child she was carrying, and they went through 3 selections and escaped again, and was imprisoned again after Auschwitz. And she married Yitzhak Artzi, and she built a family, and she gave birth to my wife, the late Nava Artzi, who dedicated all her work to the memory of the Holocaust. And of course, my dear brother-in-law, Shlomo Artzi, who actually wrote a lot about the Holocaust. And I wanted to say that, and I want this event to change something in Israeli culture, because the Holocaust survivors are great, great heroes, and we should not call them we should not use the horrible words which were used to describe them. Now, Yitzhak Artzi was born in Romania, and at the age of 11, he joined the Zionist movement, and he was the head of one of the heads of the movement in Romania. At the time of the Second World War, he was one of the heads of the underground in Romania, and he was rescuing others, especially children, from concentration camps where the Jews of Bessarabia and North Moldova were stayed. They were expelled by the Romanian authorities between 1941 and 1942. After the war, between 44 and 46, he was an active. He rescued thousands of children. And this, what they said on Ynet yesterday, they told about the story of his rescuing was not known. He was such a modest person. He was active in a movement, and he immigrated to Israel in 1946 with his wife, Mimi, Auschwitz survivor. The ship was with the Holocaust survivors, was caught by the British authorities, and the spouses were exiled to Cyprus, where Yitzhak became the head of the movement. And later on, he became deputy mayor of Tel Aviv for 20 years, and he was in charge of culture and youth and sports. He was a member of the Knesset, and he founded the Holocaust Survivors Welfare Fund. He was the chair of Zionist youth movement and represented Israel in international institute that focused on Holocaust memory. His book, Dafka Tzioni, which was published just before he died, published by Yediot Achronot. He wrote it with my late wife, and the book summarizes all his Zionist endeavors. Wilhelm Filderman was born in Romania. His Excellency, the Ambassador, I hope that you hear the translation, because now I am speaking about heroism of Jewish people in Romania. As an officer in the First Balkan War, he was granted citations. He was one of the founders of the Jewish Union, Native Jewish Union, and he was deputy chair, and he was elected to the Romanian parliament. He became the chair of the Jewish Union, and he was the representative of the Joint in Romania. When Romania joined the war against USSR, Filderman and his colleagues signs letters to the authorities asking Jews to allow Jews to draft to the military. During the fascist regime, he used everything he had in order to cancel the law to wear the yellow star. After Antonescu came to power, he used his personal contacts with him because he used to be his colleague, and he asked him to minimize or cancel some of the measures taken against Jews. He endangered himself because he kept on pleading and making demands to Antonescu, and he was behind the rescuing delegation on behalf of the Jewish committee. And despite they were friends, Filderman was exiled to Transnistria, where more than 400,000 Jews were murdered. He came back to Bucharest 3 months later because of the Queen Elena requested that. After the rise of communists, Wilhelm Filderman was arrested again, and in 1948 he left Romania illegally, and he was sentenced. Thank you very much. It's okay. It's okay that you didn't follow the guideline, the outline, and I know what you mean, and I know that the heroism is so important. And so this is beautiful girl was saved by Yitzhak. And she didn't speak. My mom didn't speak. They didn't speak. They didn't speak. They didn't. And their history, as they told us, the second generation started once they disembarked in Haifa. And these were the stories they told us. We didn't know what happened to them during the war. And now we are carrying this sorrow, and we will hear a song about this sorrow sang by Shlomo Artzi, as he sang it during the March of the Living in 2018. Amir Gilboa is an Israeli poet who wrote this wonderful line. A man wakes up in the morning, feels that he is a nation, starts walking, and says hello to everybody around. If you can sing along with me, please sing along with this line with me.
ולכל הנפגש בדרכו קוראו שלום. פתאום קם אדם בבוקר ומרגיש כי הוא עם ומתחיל ללכת. ולכל הנפגש בדרכו קוראו שלום. פתאום קם אדם בבוקר הוא מרגיש כי הוא עם ומתחיל ללכת. ולכל הנפגש בדרכו קוראו שלום. פתאום קם אדם בבוקר הוא מרגיש כי הוא עם ומתחיל ללכת. ולכל הנפגש בדרכו קוראו שלום. שיקות על צווארנו נושא עימי את צער השתיקה, את נוף האלם ששרפנו אז מפחד. הלא אמרת אליי, העיר כל כך ריקה, הלא אמרת אליי, נשתוק מעט ביחד. שני הנוחם, בחלוני נסתם חזון המרחבים, רק הרחובות עוד מחייכים במלוא הרוחב, אל כל אשנב מוצת באור העם.
את הדברים על ז'וזה אבולקר, זכרו לברכה, מאלג'יריה.
José Abulker, the late Abulker from Algeria, and Hannah Senech from the land of Israel. We'll hear about them from attorney Aryeh Barnea, the chair of the committee to commemorating the Jewish age rescuers. I'd like to cherish them all and to mention two names only. Hannah Senech was not mentioned in the history of Israel as a rescuer. She's known, or her name is known to any school children, to any school student, because she was a paratrooper and she was killed by the enemy. But the fact that she was a paratrooper was done. She was a paratrooper in order to save Jews from the Nazis and their partners, and we judge people according to our morals. We know what her purpose was and what her efforts were like, and Hannah Senech was indeed a hero, but we cannot actually demand any Jew who wanted to save other Jews to be successful, because success was almost impossible. But in Hannah Senech's case, the effort was almost impossible from the land of Israel, from Sdot Yam, to actually fly to the most hostile territory. And then she was caught and never managed to fulfill her purpose. But we are saluting her for her effort, for her attempt. The least known name of Yosef Abulker from Algiers, this talented guy led an underground movement with 300 Jews and 15 French. They took control over the capital and gave it to the Americans. And they actually avoided the battles by doing that. But thanks to these heroic actions of the under movement, the Americans managed to enter the area earlier, and they prevented the Nazis and their helpers to fulfill the plan to expel the Jews of Algeria, which started actually happening in Libya, in North Africa. Hundreds of Jews were already expelled to the camps in Europe. Abulker not only fought against the Nazis, and he was a physician, and together with his friends rescued the whole community. And the fact that we haven't told his story so far is really, really bad. Is it related to the fact that he was not a Zionist, that he belonged to a different community, the community from Oriental Jewish group? But we are trying actually to correct it and salute him. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that the students of Israel will hear more and more about these people, so that their education will be better, so that they will have something to lessons to learn from. Now I'm inviting Holocaust survivor, Eliezer Lev Zion.
Shalom lachem.
Hello, everybody. I'm 94 years old. I was born in 27. 1927, and I'm here to tell you about Jewish heroism, about the dedication of all of those who weren't arrested to save others. And I want to mention the girls. The boys were not that good at that because we were certain they were able to recognize us, but the Jewish girls, their story should be told because our nation has this tendency to cry and to weep, but not to remember the hard work, the rescue that took place in the rescuing that took place in Europe by Jewish youth and Jewish girls of blessed memory. So keep on telling these stories about heroism, and thank you very, very much. I remain healthy. May you remain healthy and give us your testimony in the coming years. This Jew fought in the mountains and he built his home here in Veilan. Thank you very much, Eliezer. The Jewish Rescuer Citation was established in 2011. The purpose was to cherish the actions of those heroes who dared to help their brothers and sisters and to save them from the bitter destiny. They endangered their life in order to make sure that Jews will be able to continue to live in their countries or to help them to find haven. Citations were granted, many citations were given to rescuers from all over Europe, Russia, Yugoslavia, Ukraine, Austria, Belarus, Italy, Poland, Morocco, Algeria, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, Belgium, and the land of Israel. And this is what the citation says. This certificate says that the Jewish Rescuer Citation is hereby granted to cherish the dedication, heroism, and courage of the rescuers while saving others. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Avraham Duvdevani, the chair of JNF, Dr. Chaim Katz, chairman of the World Center of Bnei Brit, Mr. Nissan Chalik, the head of the board of directors for Holocaust survivors at JNF, Mr. Sar Shalom Jerby, the head of a department in JNF, and Mr. Ellen Schneider, director of the Global Center of BB Bnei Brit and secretary of the subcommittee, and the representative of the family who is called by name, please go to the stage and remain on stage till the end of the ceremony. The citation, the certificate for the late Yitzhak Arzi will be given to his grandchild, Nimdor Semel. The citation of Wilhelm Filderman will be given to Mrs. Anatalon, the grandchild of his brother's grandchild. The citation of Yosef José Albuquerque will be given to Eyal Dolev, the husband of his sister's great-grandchild. The citation of Hannah Senesh will be given to her nephew, Eitan Senesh.
ואלה שאר מקבלי
And
אותו...
here are the names of the other people who got the citations. Yaakov Gutfreund, who was born in Poland. In 1983, he was escaped to Belgium after being active in the communist movement for 14 years. In the beginning of 1942, he decided to establish the first group of Jewish partisans. Till the end of the war, he led the company in Brussels, and he took action against the Nazis and cooperators in order to save Jews. They burnt lists of Jews from Brussels in order to avoid their murder. And in 1943, he was appointed the commander of the partisan battalion. They actually actively fought, and they collected intel, and they made sure that there would be connection between the various activists. And then he was injured during one of the actions, and he was arrested by the Gestapo and hospitalized in a hospital under heavy guard. 2 days after, he was taken by his partisan colleagues. Sarah Gottfried, the late Sarah Gottfried, was born in Poland. In 1939, she reached Belgium as a political immigrant. At the end of 1940, where the new orders were polished, she started being active. In 1942, she joined a group under the command of Yaakov Gottfried. She was one of the first ladies. Her role was about transferring orders and supplying weapons for actions. In April 1943, Sarah took part in another action that was meant to save 8 Jews that were hospitalized after heavy guards after they escaped from the train on the way to Auschwitz. She was also an active in CDJ in rescuing children. And she actually lived in, she sent them to monasteries, the children to monasteries and Christian families. She raised funds and she gave food coupons to those families who helped the Jews. But her main role was to convince the parents to give their children away. Sarah was caught in Brussels by the Gestapo in June 1943. And after a week when she was tortured, she was sent to Malin camp, and a month later she was sent to Auschwitz, where she survived 21 months. She was liberated in May 1945 after the death camp, and where she participated for 3 months. When the war ended, Yaakov and Sarah got married and they had 1 daughter. In 1957, they immigrated to Israel and settled down in Jerusalem. The citation will be given to their daughter, Mala Gutfreund Meir.
Vita Kampner Kovner.
Vita Kampner Kovner, the late Vita Kampner Kovner. She was born in Poland. When the German went into Kalisz in September 1939, she ran away and she joined the Shomer HaTzair movement. She was locked in a ghetto after the occupation, and she joined the Partisan Union, an underground movement that was active in the ghetto. She was a liaison between the ghetto and the Aryan side of the city. This is how to got to know her husband, Abba Kovner, the commander of the Partisan. Kovner was appointed the commander of the patrol brigade. After one of the actions in Vilna, she decided on her own to lead to the forest a group of 60 non-fighter Jews and save their lives. She infringed knowingly the order of the partisans that forbid bringing non-fighters to the foster, but she was considered resourceful, and it helped her when she faced these hardships. In July 1944, she joined the Red Army that liberated Vilna. All of her families were members of the family were members. In 1946, she immigrated to Israel together with Abba Kovner, and they had 2 children together. In 1993, she lit a torch in the national ceremony in Yad Vashem. The citation will be given to her son, Michael Kovner.
William Bechner, זכרו
William
לברכה.
Bechner, the late William Bechner, he was born in Bialystok, Poland, where he actually absorbed the German culture and language. Before he graduated from his studies, he moved to Warsaw, where he was imprisoned in the ghetto. With the help of his cousin, who worked in a German company, he was accepted to work as an engineer under forged identity. So he took advantage of it and gave jobs to his Jewish relatives. After German invasion to USSR, the company started working in Ukraine, where Bechner also made sure that the Jews were employed in order to save them. He risked his life to save others. And then he needed to expose his real identity to his employer, but he managed to persuade him to continue with the rescuing enterprise, and he managed to save 70 Jews. The citation will be given to the daughter of his cousin.
Nahum Remba.
Nahum Remba was born in Kolne, Poland, a son of a Zionist family, all whose members were active in various Zionist parties. He was married to Henia and a father, and for 15 years he was the secretary of the educational department in the Jewish community. He was the chair of the Clerks Union. He was organizer of the Jewish Council. And during the Great Action, July till September 1941, he was in Ghetto Warsaw, where all Jews were gathered. He bribed the guards not to actually call some of the Jews, and he saved so many Jews. He was rescuing Jews in the ghetto, and then he was informed on, and then they wouldn't allow him to continue to do what he did. After the ghetto was destroyed, he was sent to Majdanek camp, where he continued to be active to rescue children, and he was in contact with the Jewish National Committee till he perished, and his nephew will receive the citation in his name.
Chaim
Moshe Bezalel Shafira, a political and leader of Jewish Zionism, a minister and member of the Knesset. He was born in Belarus. He was an active in the organization of Mizrahi youth, and he organized youth groups. In 1925, he immigrated to Israel, and he used his brother's name to get a certificate. At that year, he was elected to the Vaad Poel, and he participated in all Zionist congresses. He was the head of the Jewish Agency Immigration Department. During his role, he went to Vienna in August 1939 to meet with Adolf Eichmann. The meeting took place at the Gestapo's offices, and Shapira actually managed to save a few thousands of Jews from Vienna by issuing certificates and actually paid bribery. The citation will be given to his grandchild, Mordechai Cohen.
Ruth Uzred.
Ruth, the late Ruth Ozerd. She was born in Berlin in February 1939 when she was only 14 years old. She was sent to Brussels with a group of children and her younger sister. After the occupation of Belgium, she arrived in France and stayed in La Ville Palace in the west of France. Then she reached Grenoble, where she joined the Zionist youth movement. And she managed to transfer children to shelters and forged documents. There was one time when she rescued a one-year-old baby. When the Gestapo learned about it, they threatened that they will take the baby. She risks her life. She went to the nursery wearing Gestapo uniform. She asked the director to bring the baby, and she even slapped her. The Gestapo, the real Gestapo, arrived later and started searching for the baby in vain. She fled Grenoble. She joined a delegation that crossed the Pyrenees on the way to Spain, and then she reached the land of Israel on Guinea ship that sailed from Lisbon. The citation will be given to her son, Ohad Ozerd.
משלחת, בכבוד, בכבוד חברים, בכבוד.
Such a great honor. The late Lynn Port, she was active at Uza Guerrero ever since 1942. She hid children in the area of Montpellier. She was responsible of treating Oza children who were liberated by Andrea Solomon. Some of the children were sent to the United States, some were brought back to their families, and some were transferred to Oza houses. Lynn moved to Po and Toulouse and handled social problems of families in distress. Once in a while, she moved children in order to rescue them. In September 1943 till February 1944, she helped the regional director of UZA at Chambéry to obtain forged certificates, work permits to the Jews. She hid children in Savoy. She risked her life endlessly. Luckily, she was absent from the UZA branch on the 8th of February, 1944, when the Gestapo arrived, arrested all the employees and expelled all the employees. After this event, Lynn joined her parents and gave the lists of children to other activists to continue to rescue them. After the liberation, on the 7th of August, 1945, she married Rudolf Port, a member of the AJ Army. She became active again in Toulouse, and she managed the branch there till it was closed in 1947. The late Rudolf Port, a member of the Jewish resistance in France from June 1941, was born in Strasbourg, and he was a member of the first branch of Jewish resistance group, and then became part of the Jewish Army, AG. Port acted under the Hort France organization, was one of the first to continue to issue forged certificates for Jews and for those who were actually smuggled from the camps. He made sure to find shelters for Jews refugees, and after that he was transformed to Medjev, and he had a role there. And in most of these delegations, most of these convoys, there were children. In January 1944, he moved to Lyon, one of the most dangerous areas, where the commander of the Gestapo, Klaus Barbie, was active. He was called the Butcher from Lyon. Port was in charge of finance, and the citation will be given to their son, Lynn and Rudolf's sons, Menachem Port.
ואלה מקבלי האותות.
The citations.
נקריא כעת
Now we will read the names of a few Holocaust victims, of children who were murdered in Transnistria. Just a few out of the 410,000 Jews who were murdered there. The names will be read by members of scouting groups of JNF
על שם אורי מימון בבית שמש.
in Beit Shemesh.
Bella Ripstos,
Bella Ripstos, 3 years old. Tove Shower, 4 years old. Moshe Shichman, 16 years old. Yozia Shichman, 13 years old. Yosele Shechter, 13 years old. Moshe Sharf, a year old. Tzili Somer, 4 years old. Yaakov Koifman, 11 years old. Elimelech Kotzber, a year old. Zvi Kirzner, 3 years old. Leah Lechner, 13 years old. Tatiana Lerner, 3 years old. Gita Malo, 4 years old. Herman Shipnagel, 12 years old. Avraham Kerler, 12 years old. Suka Rosen, 6 years old. Shmuel Rosenzweig, 11 years old. Sarah Primant, 10 years old. Dina Solomon, 6 years old. Gershon Schenkerman, 11 years old. Frida Launer, 9 years old. Yechida Chark, 4 years old. Surale Teleflaro, 3 years old. Motzke Teleflaro, 5 years old. Rachel Tratz, 4 years old. Yerachel Teret, 9 years old. Chaim Katz, 6 years old. Moshe Shechter, 7 years old.
Genia Zeidman.
Genia Zeidman, 14 years old. Fidel Zilberman, 4 years old. Nunia Zilberman, 10 years old. Yasha Jeter, 4 years old. Dora Chitron, 3 years old. Isser Khatma, 5 years old. Dan Sankerman, 14 years old.
יהיה זכרם ברוך.
May they be of blessed memory. We will now invite the honor guard. Please stand up.
משמר, מהשמאל, קדימה, צא, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. משמר, העמוד. משמר יפנה. פנימה, פנה. משמר יציג את נשקו. צא, שק. משמר יעבור לנוח. עוד נוח.
יזכור מפי מנהל החטיבה
The Yizkor prayer will be prayed by Mr. Shalom Jerby.
משמר יחטיף את נשקו. צא, שק.
יזכור אלוהים את כל הנשמות של
Yizkor prayer.
בגולת אירופה שעלו על מוקד בשנות השואה.
May we remember all the Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, 6 million men and women, children, girls and boys,
זקן וטף שנהרגו
elderly and infants who were murdered, cruelly murdered,
במקומות מגוריהם,
where they lived, in cities, in towns and villages,
הובלו למחנות הריכוז,
and some of them were led to concentration camps and were murdered and burned
מחנות ההשמדה האיומים,
in the horrible death camps in Germany and Poland and in other countries by the Germans together with their partners who worked together and wanted to destroy and to murder the Jewish nation and to destroy the memory of Judaism.
נקמות, שופט הארץ, זכור נא את נחלת
Dear Lord, remember all the bloodshed.
בנים,
Remember all those fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, teachers and students.
שבת שמע ישראל,
Shema Israel.
שקוע לקוחים למוות,
They were crying, the victims were crying.
תעלה לפני כיסא כבודו,
Shema Israel.
לנקום במהרה בימינו
And
לעינינו,
avenge
ובדם בניך ובנותיך.
their souls of those heroes who weren't buried in Israel. As it says, we shall avenge their blood.
אדמתו עמו.
משמר יציג את נשקו. צא, שק.
תפילת אל מלא רחמים מפי
Prayer
רב
of El Maleh Rachamim will be heard by the rabbi of border police, Eldad Gutel.
משמר יחטיף את נשקו. צא, שק.
My name is Eldad Gutel. I'm standing here in front of you humbly. I'm the boy of Giselle Gutel, who was rescued with her sister Liz by people, courageous, good, kind people who saved them in France. And the grandchild of Rabbi Aharon Gutel, who saved kids in France and sent some of them to Switzerland. And I'd like to remind us all that the salvation of Israel in Egypt started with the story of the Jewish midwives who were courageous enough and did not follow the decree of Pharaoh. And then there is the story of Pharaoh's daughters who raised Moses in the palace, in Pharaoh's palace. But mostly, I'd like to undermine together, and I would like to concentrate on our wish to meet the Messiah from the destiny of David, King David, who was the offspring of Ruth and Lot. Why did Lot was at the head of this chain that will lead to the Messiah who will fix our world? I understand that the story that appears in Sodom, where the guests of Lot are attacked by the mob who want to take their lives, but Lot was courageous enough and saved them from those who wanted to harm them. But that was the privilege of Lot to be at the head of this chain that will lead to Jewish salvation. And you, dear policemen and policewomen, I'd like to remind us all that any salvation derives from those who are courageous enough to sacrifice their own lives, and in their memory, in the memory of this 6 million Jews who gave their lives. And now we're going to pray the El Maleh Rachamim prayer.
שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר רקיע מהירים ומזהירים. רבבי רבבות אחינו ואחיותינו, אנשים, נשים, זקנים וטף, שנהרגו על קדושת השם, שנרצחו, שנטבחו, שנחנקו, שנשרפו חיים בידי החיה הנאצית ועוזריהם בימי שואת יהודי אירופה. בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן העדן תהא מנוחתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותם, ונאמר אמן.
שמר יציג את נשקו. צי, קשיק. שמר יעבור לנוח. מאוד נוח.
קדיש. מפי זאב
This prayer will be said Ze'ev Shapira, the grandson of rescuer Moshe Shapira.
שמר יעבור לדום. שמר, דום. שמר יחטיף נשקו. טיף, שק.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. ועל מה דיברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובמכון וכד כל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יש למרה בי נשמע וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. שלום ובמה ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
שמר יציג את נשקו. צי, קשיק. שמר יעבור לנוח. מאוד נוח.
התקווה.
Hatikva, the national anthem.
שמר, דום. שמר יחטיף נשקו. טיף, שק. שמר ידגל את נשקו. גל, שק.
כל עוד בלבם בנימה נפש יהודי
ציג נשקו. ציג, שק. שמר יבוא לנוח, מוד נוח.
קהל מתבקש להמשיך לעמוד.
Please remain standing till the honor guard descends.
ציג נשקו. ציג, שק. שמר יפנה. חוצה, פנה. צא שמאל, קדימה, צאה. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל. שמאל, ימין, שמאל.
תם טקס יום
This is the end of the ceremony.
לשנת תשפ"א. תודה.
Thank you, Mr. Ellen Schneider and Mr. Dudu Ashkenazi, who worked very hard, and Master Sergeant Bader Haitem, our partner, who help us every year. Thank you to all of those who helped this complex production, Shmuel Ben Chamo from Live Company, and all the participants in the ceremony, and all the viewers who watch us live. After the ceremony, we will hear another testimony from Mr. Chaim Roth. You are all invited to listen to these stories, inspiring stories. Thank you, everybody. Those who received the citations, hello, my name is Chaim Roth. Chaim Roth.
אני חיים רות, בהולנד יש חיים רות.
So it's Chaim Roth. I was born in 1932 in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I had 5 siblings. Here you can see a picture of us in the beach, my older sisters, and I was the younger. You can see me right here. And we were very happy. We were from the middle class, and we lived happily, especially as kids. We didn't know anything, and we didn't follow. I guess my parents were more aware of what was going on in Germany with the Kristallnacht in Germany, but as children. And I also had a brother-in-law, and when the war broke, I was almost 8 years old. And in May 1940, the Germans, 4 days, managed to conquer the Netherlands. We were all surprised that even the government was surprised because they thought that something similar will happen to something similar to the World War II, that the Germans won't attack the Netherlands, but they realized that the Germans had other plans and they attacked us. And in Yom Kippur War, there was a rabbi was also surprised, and nobody believed that, but it didn't matter. Anyway, the Germans started to bomb Rotterdam, and they killed 4,000 civilians. It's important for my story because all the children who were saved were the children of families that were killed during the bombing of Rotterdam, which was a seaport city and the second largest city in the Netherlands. So every child had these cover-up stories that came from Rotterdam. So we, at the beginning, I don't really remember the period before the war, but life went on as usual till they started. There were also all sorts of decrees of orders, such as You cannot ride your bike, and everybody rides bikes in the Netherlands, and you can't use the light train, which was the main transportation in the city, and you're not allowed to play in a playground. So, so God forbid you will contact a non-Jew kid. And you are not allowed to go to public school. And I came from a very religious family. And still my parents sent us to an ordinary school because they wanted us to know the other culture. But anyway, I had to leave the school and I moved to a Jewish school, which was further away from my house. I needed to walk. And then it became worse and worse. The situation became worse and worse. The Germans started, like they did everywhere, they started to gather all the Jews from the periphery, and then they actually arrived in Amsterdam. One night they just knocked on our door, and we used to live with the grandfather, and grandmother died before the war. And then my grandmother died at a younger age, and we didn't know that she were actually lucky to pass away before the war. And they knocked on our door. We opened it. And who came to take us? 2 SS officers and 2 Dutch police officers. And the story about the Netherlands is not exactly as people tend to think. In the Netherlands, out of 140,000 Jews who lived there before the Holocaust, only 35,000 Jews survived the war. 75% were murdered, much worse than the situation in Belgium or in France or in other Western Europe countries. And so there was cooperation there. My older sister was 18 years old at the time, and when she saw the police officers, she said, "You too?" And then she was beaten by the officers, and we were led to the municipal theater, and they brought groups of 1,000 Jews, and they sent them once a week to this camp within the Netherlands. And there were groups of 1,000 people, and it was in the theater. There were several toilets there, but of course not. There weren't any showers. I was a child, we stayed at an opposite kindergarten, just opposite the theater, and between the theater and the kindergarten, there was a light train station, but they guarded the theater and they didn't guard the kindergarten. So sometimes when the light train passed, they managed to smuggle or to send kids from the kindergarten, put them on the train. So some of the kids were saved, but other kids were sent to Auschwitz. And like with Korczak, there was a supervisor of the kids, and but the supervisor did not want to leave the kids, and she joined them to Auschwitz. And of course, she was murdered. And somehow we left the theater. It was quite extraordinary. I think we didn't we didn't discuss the Holocaust with my parents after the Holocaust, so I don't know exactly how we were released, but we needed to go to the ghetto, and there were two small apartments there. My older sisters live in one of the apartments with my grandfather, and we lived, myself and the other four siblings and my parents lived in another apartment. And then 43, they knocked on my sister's door and told them, you need to be ready in 10 minutes, we're going to take you. And they managed to warn us, to warn our parents. And indeed, 10 minutes later, the Germans knocked on the door, and the following morning, they saw that they actually left the rest of the family behind, and they came back and knocked on our door, and our parents realized they had to open the door, and with our family had lived in the Netherlands for generations, but my mom knew German, and she started yelling at the Germans, what are you doing, etc., etc. And then we heard that one SS officer told the other, Ich hab genug, I've had enough, and he closed the door. And this was one of the reasons that we were lucky that my mother managed to speak to them in German. And it was New Year's Eve, and my mom told us, remove the yellow star and to join a lady. And we joined this lady. We removed our first, yellow star for the first time, and we followed this lady. And this lady, we walked to the train station, and then we traveled to the eastern part of the Netherlands. And the ride was about 2 or 3 hours long, and then we arrived in this village, Nierlanden village. It's one of the two villages. There was one village in France and the other one in the Netherlands, where there was a farmer with 8 children, and he initiated the rescuing of Jews, both adults and children. And then he was caught and executed in the beginning of 1945. But he had someone who helped them, Arnon Dauersch, and he had someone else who helped them, Dikoleos. And Dikoleos was a Jew, and okay. And after the war, he met with my daughter, a Jew. You can see the Jewish nose, clearly a Jew. But he hid, and he said that he wanted to help the non-Jews as well. And at first they were scared. They thought that he was questioned by the Gestapo. And then he began searching and found some places, and Almut believed him at the end, and then we worked together. So this village was acknowledged, and most of the residents of the village were granted the status of righteous Gentiles. I don't really remember much, but this is, I'm not speaking about from my own memory because I don't remember much. But then at night, at a cold night, I was moved. I was transferred from this place 30 kilometers away by bike, and they brought me somehow because they were scared of using the highway, so they used, all sorts of shortcuts. So we traveled at night for 30 kilometers, and we rode the bike, and at 11:30 at night, we knocked at the door of this home, and it turned out the people inside this house were willing to hide the Jews. It was a bakery, and there were two people there about in their 50s. They had two older children and one younger children who was 16 years old. And it's hard to imagine. There were no telephones, and the underground movement paid them a visit 2 weeks beforehand, and they asked them to help. So they were willing to help, but they wanted a girl, not a boy, because it's much easier to hide a girl because the boys were, of course, circumcised. So in the middle of the night, I came. What could they do? They couldn't do anything. It was an extraordinary family. They didn't prepare anything in advance. They just went up the bed, and I slept with them on a single bed. And then I spent there about a year and a half. I shared their bed. I shared the bed with their son, a 16-year-old son. I was about 11 years old at the time. And the problem was that he liked to talk, and he didn't. They told him that I came from a family from Rotterdam. They didn't tell him that I was Jewish, and I managed to conceal it from him. I don't know how. But anyway, I went to school for almost a year, and then in September, I went to school. It was a very nice day. There were about 300 kids outside, and then the principal said, "Hank," this was my name back then, "Hank, tell your aunt that we don't have space for you at school." He suspected that I was a Jew, and he didn't want to obey the Germans' order because he didn't want to endanger. But we were surprised because I knew I was supposed to go to school, and then I spent all of my time in the bakery, and they heated the bakery with wooden logs. So you used to wake up in the morning very early, and I started helping at the bakery. I had nothing else to do, and I gave food to the farmers, and so it was a very small village, and then this family, which was a very special family, they treated me very, very, very well, and they wanted me to feel like I could trust them, and I didn't want me to feel this immediate danger, and they were really, unfortunately, there were many informers, so they were always feared that someone will inform. But I came. This was a religious Christian family, and from day one, they took me to the church, and I needed to behave as if I know everything about Christianity. I don't know how I pretended to know. I don't know how I did that. And then the war ended, and there was a difference between northern and southern Netherlands. there was one bridge too far. The Allies did not continue, did not cross the river, and they didn't manage to cross the river. So southern Netherlands was actually liberated 6 months later. And it turned out that my parents and one of my siblings were in southern Netherlands, and me and two of my other siblings were in the north. And there were no telephones. It's hard to imagine today, but my parents did not know anything about what was going on with me, who remained alive with me and my other siblings. And one day, some of their acquaintances told them that they were in this town next to the village where I was staying, and they started searching for us, and it was all helped by the Red Cross. And it took a while, and but we weren't allowed to move from the northern part of the country to the southern part of the country because of all the diseases, until one day they came to pick us up, and there was one more brother of mine. He came along, and they took him, and then they took me. And my aunt collected logs, and I told my aunt, "Oh, they're picking me up." That was the lady who actually hid me. She thought I was kidding, but we had great relationship. And then they brought us to the southern Netherlands, Antwerp, and my parents arrived there as well. After a while, they managed to hide throughout this period somewhere in the Netherlands, and it wasn't that easy to move from the south to the north, and the cars. They actually, I was covered by a blanket, and the soldiers were too tired to notice my brother and myself. And this is how we met with my parents again. It was the middle of the night, and my two sisters, we heard that my two sisters were murdered in Auschwitz. And the grandfather, whom we loved so much, and the great-grandfather had 18 kids. So we had a really big families, and almost all of members of the family were murdered in the camps. And it turned out that they had this postcard. They received a postcard from my young sister, who was 18 years old. She survived the war, and she was hospitalized. And a month after she was hospitalized, she wrote to us. She wrote a postcard. She sent a postcard. She was dying, actually, it was a very short letter, and she mentioned all the names of her relatives who were murdered with the exact date. And we asked ourselves, why did she write the date? And perhaps it was because we were a religious family, so she wanted that maybe she wanted us to say the Kaddish for them. And then the parents, especially my mom, who was very, she had many non-Jews friends. Many of my parents' friends were non-Jews, and my mom was so disappointed with the way the Dutch behaved. And after one of my siblings immigrated to Israel, we all followed him. We didn't want to stay in the Netherlands. And one sibling immigrated to Israel. He lived in Mikveh, Israel. He participated in the War of Independence. And then my parents decided to immigrate to Israel as well, despite all the difficulties. And I graduated from high school, and then I immigrated as well. And later now I want to talk about one thing. There were two Germans who were responsible for the destruction of the Jews of Netherlands. They weren't executed. I don't know why, these Germans. And when they reached the age of 80, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands decided to send them back to Germany and Austria. He pitied them. And so probably if you kill 5 people, then you get a life sentence. And if you kill 5,000 people, then but then again, you get, then someone takes pity on you. So we organized the demonstration. I brought 32 books containing the names of all the Jews who were murdered. People started looking at the books, at the list, and they found the names of the relatives, and there were dates, their date of birth, and there was also the date of where they were murdered, and people started crying. And on the way back to Jerusalem, I initiated this enterprise of every person has a name. I started it, and this is Ladiado helped me with this enterprise. She knew the chairperson of the Knesset, and this is how it all started. And today everybody knows about this. One more topic that I want to share with you. So as I said, amongst the rescuers, after the war, you can see him with my young daughter. And this Jew, as I said, started helping others. He collected at the village of Nirlando, which I already mentioned. So there in this village, there is a monument with 200 names of those who rescued the Jews. All of them are righteous Gentiles. And on top of them, there is the name of the names of those non-Jews, Christians. I suppose they were Christians. But there were some names missing. 2 of the members of the underground movement were mentioned there, but one name was missing. And I was upset because I knew him and he saved me. And then I got more interested, and it turned out that there were that in the occupied countries such as France and Hungary, and in every other occupied countries, there were many stories of many cases of rescuing, but despite that, it wasn't that known. And only 2 years ago, Yad Vashem Museum decided, after many years, and I want to talk about spilled milk, but anyway, about 2 years ago, they actually dedicated the topic to heroism, but unfortunately, the Jews, it actually happened too late, and these rescuers were not being recognized. And some of you participated in the ceremony conducted by Bnei Brit. Later on, I initiated a committee in order to make this topic more widespread, but unfortunately, not so many people know about it, and we want to change it. And still, we want everybody to know about all these people who risked their lives, and they were willing to endanger themselves and as Jews, and they were willing to do that. And that's why this story is very, very important. And in this committee, there was a partner, someone who worked closely with me, the director of Bnei Brit. I forgot, Ellen. And he worked with me, and he had this idea. Let's acknowledge them. Bnei Brit, together with the committee, we will grant certificates, citations to these people. And most of these people, of course, are already dead. So we will give these citations to their relatives. So for the past 12 years, more or less, for 12 years ago, we started with this annual ceremony where we grant some of these people those citations for Jewish rescuers. And unfortunately, we found only 350 of them, but I know that there were so many others, but we don't know the details. And the last thing that I want to say, my message about the war, I've never, when we say never again, we should actually consider not only the Jews, but all other nations. We all should be active, and we should not keep on complaining about the situation today in Israel. We know that we are very much, there are so many rifts in our Israeli society, and it might lead to a disaster. And rescuing by Jews, and by the way, most of the rescuers were young, from the age of 17, actually, and they served as a role model, and they still serve as a role model. So that's why it's so important to tell this story, to tell their story, the story of Jews who rescued other Jews, and to tell this story 75 years after it happened. And perhaps we should, and I'm saying that as a Holocaust survivors, with everything that I've been through and my family has been through, but let's actually make sure that our country is getting better and better, instead of thinking about our tragedies. We are strong now. We need to make sure that we remain strong, not only in terms at the level of the military power, but in terms of our society as well. Thank you very much.